I'm Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield.
I'm Kate Walton-Elliott.
And this is the 2023 Kia Niro EV. We're about to take it for a spin. Won't you join us? For reasons that will become apparent later in this video, you haven't had a huge amount of time behind the wheel of this car, but already I can see a big smile on your face.
Yeah, it's really pleasant. It's pleasant in the same way that the previous Niro was. It doesn't take you by the hand and drag you places. It just does stuff.
It's got that comfortable pair of shoes feel about it, and not in a bad way. I need reassurance, I need to feel that the world is okay, and I think we all need to feel that the world is okay right now. This is not a car that makes you regret spending a huge amount of money on it. It's a car that wants to work for you and is happy to work with you. And there are days in the EV world where I feel that kind of car is sorely missing in a lot of automaker portfolios.
Well, I think particularly here in the US, where we have such a limited selection of vehicles available compared to, say, Europe or China, there are very fancy, expensive EVs that feel very fancy and expensive. And there are cheaper EVs, not the cheapest, but
right.
Things like the Bolt and the Bolt EUV. And there's nothing that much in the kind of, not the real mid-segment where, 50k and above, where we're looking at things like Ioniqs and...
Right.
The cars that people just drive every day to work, that they take their kids to school in, that do the chores.
It's got, forgive me for saying this, and I hope I don't upset Kia by saying this, or Kia fans come to that, it's got a Volkswagen Golf attitude, work ethic.
It actually does. It is very much reminiscent of a modern version. I used to own a Golf. In fact, we both own Golfs. Your one was electric because you're fancy.
Because I'm fancy.
Mine was a very heavily breathed on 1500 Mark I, which was a very nice red car. And that joke only makes sense if you know that Nikki thinks it's brown. But
I didn't say anything. She explained the joke for me. It was brown.
But yeah, it does. I hadn't thought of that, but it totally does.
It's that non-ostentatious interior. It's a perfunctory feel without being too over the top. And in fact, I'm going to go one step further. This, I think, is the car that I had hoped the Volkswagen ID4 was going to be.
Yes, I can see that.
That people's car that is very functional and very pleasant to be behind the wheel of. It doesn't have the yes and that some of the other cars we've driven this year have had. But it has the where to?
Yes.
Where are we going today? What are we going to see? What are we going to do? Can I come with you?
Yeah.
The seats are very comfortable. I think I prefer the seats in your Niro, but I think that's just because your Niro's got better worn seats and this car's got less than 2,000 miles on the clock and seats tend to wear in as you drive them more. I like the driving position.
Yeah.
It is very similar to the driving position in your car.
It really does feel like they've taken the things that made the original Niro so popular And they've just tweaked and improved them and just, given some of them a little bit more polish. This center console, more polished. This whole front end feels a lot more modern. For me, I prefer the throttle response of the original Niro.
Yes. Although the sport mode is pretty good.
Yeah, the sport mode is pretty good. It's a little more gentle, and you can feel that. And they said they were making it more gentle, which is actually a response to customer feedback. I like that the old Niro gave you a little bit more of that punch. I mean, it's 150 kilowatts. It's not push you back in your seat screaming terror, which, actually I think is a really pleasant thing for a car that's your daily driver.
I do, but interestingly, this is about 130 pounds, so what's that, 60 kilo-ish, 65 kilos lighter than your Niro.
It is. I think, though, that they've remapped the torque curve a bit. The motor, bizarrely, it says it's 150 kilowatts and 206 horsepower, and it used to be 150 kilowatts and 201 horsepower.
I think that was a mistype on Kia's part, and we have seen that with spec sheets from Kia before. There have been some design element changes to this car that I'm curious to know what you think. The first is this dashboard.
I think that I do think this is a really nice dashboard, to be honest. I think that it's very pleasant. I'm a little concerned about whether they'll get a lot of glare when the sun is in the wrong position.
Right.
But it is essentially a smaller version of the dashboard from the EV6. And I think it works very well. It does appear not to have wireless Android Auto again.
Well, see, if you look at the spec sheets on the press site for Kia, they do say wireless CarPlay and Android Auto capability, which I think might be a sneaky way of going, yeah, it's got the hardware in it, we just haven't pushed the software update yet. I think that's what they mean.
Yeah, which is, I think, what they said for the EV6 originally, which obviously still doesn't have wireless Android Auto or CarPlay. And I don't know whether to believe the rumours that it's related to their contract with the company that supplies their navigation software. But you do have the nice Qi charger down here, which unfortunately is a bit less well hidden than the old one. I like that in the old Niro your phone isn't really visible to you.
Yeah, it was right up top here above this bar, wasn't it?
It was. But yeah, it is curious that they keep shipping these vehicles with capability but no function. At least in the limited time we've had, we haven't managed to get it working.
Well, hey, if it's good enough for Fisker, it's good enough for Kia, right? I mean, Fisker is shipping a car right now that doesn't even have adaptive cruise control and some other pretty basic functionality because Fisker wants to get these cars delivered before the end of the year. So I'm willing to be a little bit easier on Kia than I think you are, but I can see your point. I like the fact that we've got these two 10.25-inch digital displays. I do think there's an awful lot of piano black surrounding that area. We've got this lovely kind of LED light here that you can change the colour. It comes on at night time as a little glow, which I really like. I do not like the fact that the EV6 has given this car its weird touch button setup for the climate control. I was hoping that the Niro EV wouldn't have that.
Yeah, I think it is unfortunate. Frankly, you know me, I like buttons. I say this every review, and this system requires you to look away from the screen to see what it's doing. I mean, obviously you can use the voice commands, but it really, I don't think it's an improvement.
I think it's a way for Kia to avoid having discrete buttons and trying very hard to push future functionality into the vehicle. But at the same point, if I'm driving along and I want to change the climate, I don't want to look down and figure out whether it's in navigation, audio, or climate mode. These buttons are basically software touchscreen buttons that change according to what you need them to do. And I just find it really difficult to grok that physical buttons are more expensive for an automaker than this.
Yeah, I think it also boils down to the fact that you can put this in multiple different cars and make it look slightly different, and it doesn't really cost you anything more. They can keep one part on hand, so you look at the whole supply chain, but it disappoints me, because frankly the buttons are a better, more user-friendly solution.
And it's interesting that Hyundai put it in its cars, put discrete buttons in its vehicles. So I'd love to have been a fly on the wall during that conversation, because this is obviously a direct lift from the EV6, so that's why it's here. But yeah, I would have loved to have observed that and seen where the conversation went. Of course, your Niro EV has discrete buttons.
But then my Niro EV, when you actually look at it, it was designed in 2017.
Yes.
So,
which is quite a long time ago.
Yes, I mean, it isn't a long time ago in human time, but in
car world.
Yeah,
it's a long time.
Yeah, it's a generation difference.
I do like the fact that these center console buttons are within easy reach. I like the gear shifter. I like that everything is clear and easy to understand. And I think a lot of automakers don't understand the importance of being able to glance down and identify the button you wish to push. I'm seeing more and more kind of enigmatic button designs. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, there is a lot of that in certain other brands, and this really is very clear. It's very simple, and they're all very easily to hand. Again, there's a ton of piano black around here as well. There's also piano black on the doors. Not a big fan of that. But the functionality is really, really good.
The cabin noise, though, despite the fact that there is not a huge amount of soft touch surfaces in this car, the cabin noise is dramatically reduced on your Niro EV.
Yes, this is a much quieter vehicle. I know it has acoustic glass for the windshield. They've definitely done more with the soundproofing in here. You can really feel the difference between this and the old Niro, and you can feel that this is a much more modern design.
I also really think that this wallpaper may have something to do with it as well. And I'm wondering if Kia has missed out on a design element here. If you could have picked your favourite wallpaper to put in the roof lining of the Niro EV, you could have customised your roof.
Yes, yeah, that's definitely a thing they could have done. I think probably they were smart not to do that. I mean, we mock, but I'm really pleased that they've found so many ways to use recycled, renewable materials in this vehicle. I mean, you said these plastic back here is eucalyptus?
Yes. And it is wonderful to see automakers going towards that. You made a very, it was semi-disparaging comment earlier that I'm going to paraphrase into a nicer way of putting it now. You basically said that Kia and Hyundai tend to make decisions based on the economic viability rather than necessarily because it's the right thing to do. And you were postulating that using these post-consumer recycled plastic interiors was a smart move, partly because the cost of producing plastics has gone up because of the cost of oil and all of these other materials that go into these plastics, and that using a more environmentally friendly or a recycled alternative actually saves the company money these days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether that actually works out in terms of the math, but I think that there's an element of that. There's an element of people who are buying cars now are more cognizant of what goes into the interior. And I think that Hyundai Kia want to be known as a brand that is producing much more eco-friendly vehicles. And they see a place in the market where they can build their brand separate from its past image. And that, I think, is where they see the future for Hyundai Kia.
I think it is a smart move, both in terms of encouraging customers to make smart, ethical choices, but it also sets up these automakers for a future where they may have to be making products with recycled components in order for consumers to want to buy them. And so setting themselves up early to refine these recycled materials and make a durable, pleasant interior, I think is a really good move. Driving in sport mode is very engaging.
It is.
It maps the throttle in just the right amount. I think it does give you a closer performance feel to how your Niro EV drives. And I think it's worth touching base on the fact that all automakers seem to be dumbing down the throttle response of their EVs for second and subsequent generation vehicles.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit with the Bolt EUV as well, and we have to acknowledge that most cars come up for replacement about 12 years old, 10, 12 years old. And so people buying a new vehicle now, the last car they bought was probably a decade ago. In that situation, we're now moving from the world in which the people buying EVs were people like us who wanted an EV to a world where people are buying an EV because it's the prudent financial choice, because they can see which way the wind is blowing, because they're easier to look after, because they're more fun. But they're not buying it with the expectation that it's going to give you that EV grin. It's making a vehicle that meets the needs of a different buying population than we were used to even a year ago.
I see the need for a more homogenized EV driving experience. And I think that anybody who has driven a 1.2 or even a 2-litre petrol car would be very much at home with this vehicle.
I think, yeah, if you've driven your average mid-spec sedan from any automaker, then this will feel comfortable. It will feel pleasantly quick. It will not feel underpowered. I think if you've come to this from driving a Model 3 or a Mach-E, then you're going to be like, it's a bit slow. But I don't think that that's the target market, and I'm willing to accept that this is where we are with the marketplace.
So here's the thing. I have driven plenty of EVs this year that have felt woefully underpowered. Like, almost dangerously underpowered. They weren't, but that little voice in my head was like, yeah, you better not try getting out of a junction quickly with this car. This is not one of them. Even though it's got only 150 kilowatts.
Yeah.
It's still got the beans, and it reminds me very much of my first generation Bolt EV in terms of that acceleration. But what they've done is, instead of trying to make a car that appeals to a market segment that they desperately want to get, this is a car that has been, lightened, it's been refined, and I'm going to accelerate now. That was some wheel spin, right?
Yeah.
And that is 55. That's more than enough to get out of trouble.
I do wonder if this vehicle is going to be a bit of a conquest car for Kia.
I think this is going to be a conquest car for Kia. I think you're going to get a lot of existing EV owners switching over to this if they can't afford anything more expensive. I also think it's going to be a great first EV for many people who are switching to the brand, maybe people who are leaving GM or who are leaving Ford and want to try a Korean make. And let's be honest, Kia just keeps going from strength to strength to strength in terms of its satisfaction and its scores on various surveys.
This is a car for people who are not trying to make a statement. And I say that knowing that this vehicle on the outside is much more aggressively styled and much more interestingly styled, frankly, than the old Niro, which even with the best will in the world, I think it's quite bland. This one has much more to say on the outside than the outgoing car.
There's no point driving this car where I've not known where the steering is. And that's something that, again, is not true of all of the cars we've driven this year. Some of them have been a little bit wafty and a little bit vague. This one, no, it's very, very easy to know where you're supposed to be.
I'd actually say the steering in this car has much better road feel than the EV6. Than the Ioniq 5.
And I think that's down to the geometry of where the wheels are, where you are as a driver, and maybe the chassis as well.
I find it interesting. I'm so pleased because I was very worried when I saw that this was not just a mid-cycle refresh, that they might have made the steering feel worse. And I don't think they have. I think they've kept it really on point, and it was before and it is now.
But we're averaging 4.4 miles per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
I know, it is not that far above freezing today. It's pretty cold. And we have turned the car on and off several times, let it cool right down, had the windows open to film.
Yep.
It's doing a pretty solid job.
So even though the efficiency is pretty good, I'm not convinced that this car will actually do the claimed range per charge, and I don't think this has the winter pack, because we've got more than 3/4 of a battery state of charge, and it says 163 miles.
I suspect in the summer, if you drive gently, I can more or less get that out of the old Niro, so you can probably get it out of this one because it's got nearly a kilowatt hour more of battery storage. And so I think it depends on what you're doing. I think if you're doing a straight shot down the freeway, no, but if you are doing like mixed highway urban and you're peaking at 55, 60, then you might.
Yeah, I could see that.
The one thing I really wish that Kia had done, and the thing that I think would have made this absolutely a conquest car, just to nip back to that, is if they had made it available as with an option for four-wheel drive. And I'm so disappointed that they haven't, because so many people that have looked at the Niro in the past have asked if it came as a four-wheel drive option. So many people switching from RAV4s, from Foresters, from things like that, look at the Niro and it's not available as a four-wheel drive. And I think that Kia really missed a trick there.
It looks like it should be capable of it, right?
Yeah.
It does look like it should be an all-wheel drive 4x4. But, I mean, you could say the same thing of the Bolt EUV, so...
You could. I hope that was a change that they would make. And I understand that would be challenging to get your 66 kilowatt hours in, 64.8 kilowatt hours in, and keep that. But I don't think it necessarily needs a huge motor at the back to be able to be used on roads like this, in snow, in four-wheel drive mode, which is what a lot of people want it for. They want to be able to take it out to the mountains where, they could drive most of the way there in two-wheel drive, and they just want a bit of four-wheel drive to take it up out into the wilds.
Yeah, I think with snow tyres on, this would have been great on this road yesterday because it has that snow mode. And in fact, let me put it in snow mode. So you can put it in snow mode just by holding. It does really, you can still drive quickly, but the throttle is almost completely dead in that very first bit of the throttle response. And its design is, so in snow mode, that throttle response is very much dialed down, because the idea of snow mode is that you don't spin your wheels. It's, I think, very important to note that this car, I think, personally, is the one that I would recommend people of all income levels consider trying to get behind the wheel of. More than any other car we've driven this year.
No, I think this Unless, as I said, it's not available with four-wheel drive. So unless you live somewhere where you consistently get snow or you need four-wheel drive, I really think this is such a good package.
What do you think of the second generation Niro EV?
I think it is, and I said this before, I think about the first Niro, that it was such a well-judged car. It's a really well-judged car.
So when I get these cars and when you get these cars, sometimes they sit on my driveway and I don't want to drive them. I want to drive this all the freaking time. This is such a responsive, fun ride. The steering is tight. It goes where you want it to. It's got practicality. The interior is not so ostentatious that I'm going to worry about damaging the interior. It's got enough height that I can see as I'm driving down the road. I don't feel like I'm cocooned behind the wheel, so the visibility is great. The driver assistance technology is not intrusive. My only criticism of the driving technology, and you know where I'm going with this, is I live on a hill. I'm at about 850 feet, and I normally charge my own vehicles to about 80-90%, so that there's always regen braking to go down the hill. Because this is a press car, it came to us programmed to charge to 100%. And when I've left my house, every time I've left my house to go down the hill, every time I lift off, there's an alert that goes, you can't use regenerative braking because the battery is full. And apparently yours does that too.
Yeah, mine does that. It also, if you set the charge limit below, I leave mine at 90%, it also likes to remind you that it didn't charge to full many times, and I suspect this, given that behavior is the same, is probably going to do the same thing.
So in addition to that regenerative braking thing, the other thing that kind of I think should be changed as a default setting is the car very loudly proclaims when you plug it in and it started charging. And I don't know who at Hyundai Kia thought that was a good idea, but all of the cars do it from that company.
Not mine.
Well, yours doesn't, but all of the new ones, you plug it in and it goes, charging!
Charging started. Charging started. Charging started.
And this one is apparently set to do it at its loudest volume. I guess also we should talk about the price. $44,000 for this trim here in the US, MSRP. $41,000 for the more affordable trim variant, the entry-level trim. That does make this the most expensive of those trio of more affordable cars. The Leaf, the Bolt EV, I suppose the Bolt EUV, so Quartet, and then this.
And you're missing our favourite, the
What?
Mazda.
The Mazda MX-30 is not a car that exists in my memory. It was that bad, I wiped it from in my memory, I'm sorry. But no, seriously, this is a cracking car. It just has all of the boxes ticked, and I think because of that you can argue that that extra money is money well spent.
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, let's be honest, I come to this as someone who owns the previous generation, so maybe I'm horribly biased, but the reason I bought it was that it was the best package, and yes, it was a bit more pricey than the Bolt that was around. That was really its main competition, that and the Leaf. And yeah, I paid a bit more, but I feel like what you get for that is so worth it.
I think in Europe this is going to have a much harder time in the marketplace because there are more affordable, similarly sized, similarly spec'd models. Here in North America though, if you are looking for a car in that price point, I would recommend this over the Bolt. I would definitely recommend it over the Leaf because of that weird insistence by Nissan to keep with Chademo until the Leaf kind of shuffles off the mortal coil next year, I think is probably when it's going to happen. This moves forwards. It includes features that weren't found on the original car. It has vehicle to load. It's got a faster charging battery pack. It's more efficient. It's a more comfortable riding experience. Kudos to Kia. I think the biggest challenge for Kia right now is making sure it can produce enough of these. Available in all 50 states, which is better than the original,
Yep.
It was kind of quite difficult to get hold of at
It was
launch.
extremely difficult.
I hope that Kia is going to solve that with this model. We don't know yet because it literally is just coming to market right now. I've seen a handful of these on the road, but nothing more. And I'd love to come back and revisit this car in about a year and a half, 2 years' time to see if it's really started to take some of that crown away from the Bolt and the Bolt EUV. Because as we've discussed, we felt the Bolt EUV was a backtrack from the original Bolt, which by the way was about 44 grand in its high-end trim variant. So
Yeah.
those were quite comparable.
Yeah.
But when it comes to what this car could offer in the used car market, bring it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on that note, we are done for the day. As you can see, we have a bright winter sun shining at us from not quite as high as it's ever going to get. I mean, in fact, it has already reached its peak for the day because it's winter and we had a couple of inches of snow yesterday. That's all gone now. But anyway, that does mean we're going to be using these, which is a little less professional than we would normally like our videos to be. If you like this video, you know what to do. You can tip us with a super thanks, and you can also leave your thoughts below or in our Discord chat room. There are links below. If you do want more from us, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links below to regularly support us with a YouTube channel membership or a Patreon subscription. You can also find links below to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and Swag store. And of course, check out our Mastodon. We are no longer on Twitter. Something. I'll leave you to fill the blanks. Something. Twitter. Elon Musk. But we're now on Mastodon. So you can follow the show on Mastodon. You can also follow the rest of the team on Mastodon. And the sun has disappeared behind a cloud.
Of course it has. And that cloud, however, will not block the scrolling passage of the names on our right for our amazing charged up supporters. And shout outs go to our self-driving tier supporters: Mike Weeder, Patrick Boyarski, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Michael Goad, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Pedro Muro Pinheiro, Brophy Wolf, Chris and Michael Johnson, Tessa in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C., Stephen O'Donoghue, Kyle Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Ray-Jean Fellows, Denny Hyde, Chris Ascenter and Jim Burness. And finally, out of this world thanks to our Starman supporters: Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, JP Fagerback, Joe Bresney, John Lyons, Rory Litwin, Kevin Burrowbridge, Dave Kitchen, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Paul Conway, Reggie Watts, Will Graylan, and of course Ian, because I have it written down. I don't have to ask for
Right.
phoning
I
a
mean,
friend.
that's why she always does ask, because, you know, the teleprompter is not very clear to see. And we wear the goggle things. And I don't know about you, but my glasses are really bad. They need to be replaced. So that's another reason to support to the channel, because then I can buy new glasses. Literally. It all helps. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Share it with your friends, family, and even your mortal enemies if you wish to. Punish them with whatever it is, 20, 30 minutes of us falling in love with a very awesome car. But until next time, thanks for joining us and
Keep
evolving. I'll
Is
drive.
this the intro?
No, this is the outro.
Okay, so I have to have an opinion.
Yep.
It's nice.